On this day, a day such as this one, 25th of May in 1963, Africa made history when they founded the what? Organization of African Unity, which later became the African Union. And on the 25th day of May every year, today we're in May, just for this purpose, we celebrate the Africa Day, the Africa Liberation Day. And we have two guests in the studio to have this conversation with us. Irene Asuwa supports outreach at an organization called Composite Library. She'll tell us about it. And Muhammed Lamin Saidikan is a movement coordinator at Africa Rising. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
It's good to have you in the Situation Room. Thank you very much for joining us today. What should we say? Happy Africa Liberation Day or happy day?
Happy Africa Liberation Day.
Happy Africa. I don't know why I mean Happy Africa.
Africa.
Go with it, man.
Happy Africa Liberation Day.
Yeah.
You can hear it in your head. You're saying
See how this is going to tie you up.
Irene,
Yes.
before we talk about the day itself, Ukombozi Library. What's Ukombozi Library?
Like the name suggests, it's a library, a progressive library. We are at University Way. So what Composite Library does is document and together with communities distribute books that talk about the history of liberation struggles in Africa and beyond. It hosts two publishing institutions. That's the Mau Mau Research Center, which majorly documents the history of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army. And then we have Vita Books, which documents both post and pre-flag and paper independence. So from the fight for independence, the one that we have now on paper and the flag, and then the clamor for multi-party and towards what we are, the struggles that we still go through right now. So we work with communities across also to do what we call Ukombozi forums, which provides opportunities for communities to talk about the actions that they do on the ground and just to amplify what the communities do.
Right. It's actually a good organization. I've never heard of it, have you?
No, I haven't actually. It's actually a very unique establishment because it's clearly specialized. So if you are looking for any material, if you're looking for books, if you're looking for literature that deals specifically with what we used to refer to as a struggle, that is where you go. Where did you say it was again?
We are at University Way, Uniway House, second floor.
And it's a library just like a regular library.
Yeah.
Meaning I can apply for membership, I can be a member of the library. Oh,
Yes, you can be a member of the library. We are open Monday to Saturday from 9 to 7 p.m. in the evening.
Great. We'll talk more about that as we continue the conversation. Muhammad, welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation. Muhammed Lamin Saidikan, you are from Africa Rising. You're the movement coordinator. So who's Africa Rising?
Africans. Africans Rising.
Africans Rising.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Africans Rising is a Pan-African movement of movements of people and organizations that was put together by Africans from about 44 countries, having the feeling and then their critical analysis that the civil society on the continent have not been very relevant to the needs of Africans, and we have not been able to continue the fight that our forefathers have started as a continent to liberate the continent and its people. And then the name came out of a critic or also a challenge on Africa is Rising. That's why I stated Africans. To challenge the narrative that Africa is rising, which is not reflecting on the citizenry of African people, because more of the World Bank, the IMF connotations of Africa is rising.
Yeah,
we're looking at the GDP rise of countries. But when you look at the general and the ordinary Africans, it's not reflecting on them. So when we met in Tanzania, in Arusha in 2016, putting the idea of what the civil society really need to put itself in, we agreed that we need a movement of movements that will support, that will enable, that will empower, and will build and transform and then reinforce the spirit of Ubuntu towards the true liberation of Africa in our lifetime. So we named the movement as Africans Rising. That's what we want to see. So the movement actually is kind of what we call kind of a reflection of what the AU should look like.
So it's an umbrella for civil society organizations that have come together and said, we want to champion this conversation about Africans rising. How many civil society organizations are involved?
Yeah, at the beginning, we have 272 organizations from 44 countries. But as we speak today, Africans Rising have over 1,016 organizations and movements across 200 countries with 41,000 individual members that are in all the 55 countries in Africa, but also in some countries in diaspora. So we're about 200 countries in diaspora, because diaspora is critically part of Africa and Africans wherever they are.
I mean, just listening to what you're saying now, and then also talking about the literature that is being put out there. I think the question is, as we celebrate Africa Liberation Day today,
Yes.
then is Africa truly liberated? Are the countries and the peoples of the continent truly free? And then, depending on whether that answer is yes or no, then free or not free from what?
Great. Thank you so much for that. I think that's an interesting question. Yeah, one can debate this. We could say that, yeah, we are liberated in some way politically. We are now we own our own countries. We do our own democracy. But in many instances, when the forefathers were putting together what they aspire to be, Africa, and then the liberated Africa, Nkrumah, I remember, talked about 10 points, 10 critical points. One unified country, one army, one defense force, one currency, one economy, and then one foreign policy, and many other things that she talked about. We are very far from reaching those lines of visionary ideas, that agreements that the forefathers had said that we need to meet gradually. But then when you look at the whole concept of what Africans really need to be and then to have a dignified life, you can see that we are still also very far in many areas. Because as you see, the continent, the simplest thing that the continent could have achieved by now is for us to be able to move around within ourselves.
Yes.
We are still struggling. If you test some of the policies that have just been passed, the free trade agreement policy that have just been passed, you realize that when you take the borders, the local borders, the roads to the countries, you find a lot of hindrances and obstacles around moving goods in all corners of Africa. That's just one example. So I will summarize that the leadership of Africa have not been really very proactive and pragmatic in terms of implementing the dreams of what Africa really need to be to rise.
I would argue that perhaps when you look at the continent as a continent, that particular perspective is an academic subject, because the continent is very many countries within one particular geographical area. And that diversity is reflected in the way the leaders of each of these countries run their country. Now, I'm starting off with the Africa Free Trade Understanding. I'm calling it an understanding.
Yes.
And then I look at the regional economic blocks that have been set up across this continent. Which ones would you say are active and have actually been trying to get their particular blocks together? Why I argue this is because, in my thinking, if West Africa have a block that unifies people, East and Central Africa has one, the southern part has one, it is a lot easier for these blocks to work out an agreement, because they already have people within them who have come to some understanding, as opposed to dealing with the individual presidents. Because the story about our forefathers having opened the door. Yes, there are people who had grand ideas, but some of the problems we have were brought by those forefathers.
Yeah. All right.
Because they had a good talk, they spoke well, but what they actually did to set the foundation for what you're saying. So, now my question. The obvious hurdles that exist in our continent when it comes to not just leadership, but leadership that is committed to actually improving the lives of their people. All right? Committed.
Yeah.
How do you get leadership and those aspiring towards leadership to actually understand and to follow through on this particular, because it's a reality that can be realized.
Yes.
How do you get them to that point?
I think it's a leadership of integrity that is needed, a leadership of truth, and also a leadership of, putting Africa and the community that you represent first. When you look at the leadership of Africa, where everybody comes from homes, they come from slums, they come from the ordinary citizen, how people emerge to become leaders. But gradually, when they are put into those leadership positions, for some reason, their mentality and change, their way of doing things change. So they tend to either serve their own, clubs, or they tend to see themselves in a different club. So and then they tend to see how they can, be in that status. So they kind of detach from the realities. I will connect again to the point. There were two arguments, 2 points. One of the points around, yes, we need to liberate as Africa. We need to unify, on the spot, and then have states. Others believe that, like Standard Group, believe that they need to really have the blocks. Then the blocks need to unify. And then that's where they went with. They went with that, and then gradually you can see even the blocks within themselves. They kind of we've kind of seen that they turn themselves into clubs of leaders. So we've seen that leaders have been serving themselves. When you're in that club of leadership, when you are touched, the rest of the countries will support you and react. Then now when you're in the bigger AU body, when you are touched, the rest of them will support you. So then the citizenry is left alone. So nobody is there to support or protect the interests of the citizenry. So they have kind of betrayed the masses that they come from. So this is the struggle that we are dealing with. But it's about integrity. It's about being true to yourself. It's about being honest and then deliver the Africa that you promise to deliver when you are in the struggle of leadership.
Can I ask this question? And either of you could actually answer. Do you feel that the younger generations of this continent, not my generation,
Our generation.
your generation,
Yes.
do you think and feel that the ideas that you're talking about are ideas that they can commit to, and that the ideas that they'd like to work with? Because, yes, your generation, my generation,
It's the way.
Yes, and maybe just to add on to what we talked about earlier, we are not liberated. I mean, as you said, basic human dignity. So many Africans don't have that. And to talk about, for a long time, deliberately, African unity has been propagated as this mirage, as these dreams of individuals that can never be realized. And even when Nkrumah and Nyerere were having the back and forth about whether we should go through the regional blocks or just unify, as there were those reactionary forces, as usual, who opposed this and were very big impediments to those attempts. But you realize one thing I love about both Nyerere and Nkrumah is that they didn't deny some of the mistakes they made along the way, and they voiced them. Nkrumah actually wrote a book letter about the class struggle in Africa, something that he didn't consider when he was talking about the unification of Africa. And Nyerere also talked about the pitfalls he didn't see when he was talking about the regional blocks. And they realized way later, they've written books about them, you can come and check them out, that it was not just a mere unification of Africa. And then came the 10 points of how practically that should happen. And they were very clear that it's not a one-off thing like it is propagated right now. It is a process that requires a bit of work. Now, to your question, if you look at the celebrations or the activities that are taking place in the continent right now about Africa Liberation Day in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in so many places, in Eritrea, in Sarahawi, despite the challenges they're going through, they're being pushed by young people. So young people know, not believe. Belief is not a source of knowledge. We know that it is possible for Africa to unite. And there is no way we are going to fix these problems as single states with puppets of imperial powers. It is not going to happen. And again, as those who went before us said, there is no way we are going to liberate one side of Africa and claim that we are liberated when the other side is not liberated. And for us on the eastern side, especially in Kenya, we have the hardest work to do because we have the most embarrassing history in terms of solidarity with other African states making progress. I mean, with the situation of South Africa with apartheid, as other African states supported Mandela and crew, Kenya supported apartheid. As Zambia and Zimbabwe were fighting, the Kenyan state was asking Zambians and Zimbabwe to be civil, when here the Kenya Land and Freedom Army was in the forest for us to get this paper independence. And if you look at the route through which foreign powers, come into the region to plunder resources, they come through here. And if you look at our solidarity votes, at the UN, wherever, it is abstain or vote in favor of whoever is aggressing Africans. And so we have the hardest job to do.
You feel our cautious diplomatic approach to things.
It is one thing.
It's interesting that you say that, because just to look at the 1.5 years, over the last 1.5 years, and if you look at what was happening, and maybe a little bit before that, the uprisings that took place in Egypt, for example, led by young people, looking at the sexual fight, the fight against sexual violence taking place in Namibia
and South Africa,
led by young
Botswana,
people, looking at the revolt that we saw in Rwanda, again, led by young people, and SARS in Nigeria, young people. So we're seeing the mushrooming of some of these quote-unquote revolts around the country. Are we saying that there's a possibility then for unification through some of these activities or uprisings that we are seeing, because there is a similarity in the struggle in the certain states that exist?
Yes. Yes. In fact, I think it's evident. In fact, that's what inspired Africans Rising to be created. We felt that, why do we even name it? Why do we even name Africans Rising as a movement? Because we felt that the movements, the young people's movements, have been winning battles against injustice, and then they have been taking, revolutions to realities. As we look at this week, we are organizing about 533 events in more than 50 countries, and these are all, majority or 90% of these activities and actions have been done by young people, and they are doing this simultaneously. From yesterday, moving to the end of the week, young people are organizing, are having conversations, and having renewed that commitment and believe that yes, it's possible that in our lifetime we have to unify Africa, we have to liberate ourselves. So all these revolutions that are happening, they can be connected. That's why we are building our movement on the spirit of Ubuntu.
I actually agree with you. The only thing is, if you look at leaders whom we refer to as revolutionary, they all started off when they were young.
Yes.
So
and they died still young.
Yeah, so some died when they're still young. Yes. The ones who became old stayed in power.
Yes, they betrayed the struggle. They betrayed the struggle.
So this here again is a problem that we must find a way of resolving.
Yeah.
Because the energy that the youth have cannot be duplicated by an older generation. How do you keep this movement going so that even when those who are now youthful become older, they can still talk of maintaining the very spirit with which they started? Because they change.
Yes. Yeah,
Look across Africa.
yeah.
We are, again, one of the few countries who started off with a leader who was already old. Jomo Kenyatta was old. So, yes. Was he not?
He was.
Precisely.
When you were starting the struggle. Yeah. Let's respond to this and continue the conversation after this break. It's 7:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room. Happy Africa Liberation Day. I got it. It's the 25th day of May 2022, a day that we celebrate and we commemorate Africa's liberation. We have two guests in the studio, Irene Asuwa, who is from Composite Library. She supports outreach there, and Muhammed Lamin Saidikan, who is a movement coordinator for Africans Rising.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
This is Kenya's biggest conversation. It continues. Eric Latif, Nduokosi, Muga, our guests today as we commemorate Africa Liberation Day 2022. Muhammed Lamin Sadikan, he's a movement coordinator at Africans Rising, which is an umbrella body bringing together several African civil society organizations and individuals to come together and have a conversation about real, proper liberation for Africa. And Irene Asuwa, who is an outreach officer from Composite Library, that's on University Way, that documents the journey of Kenya's liberation. We still are not liberated. You talk about the paper and flag liberation. That means that there's more liberation that we are yet to experience. Is that so?
Yeah.
What is that other liberation?
Basic dignity again. The Kenya Land and Freedom Army had one clarion call: land and freedom. At the moment, not so many of us have access to land. In fact, more and more people are being dispossessed of their land. We've seen the demolitions, the evictions, forcefully, with no notice, are happening. In Laikipia, across the Maya rangelands, in Nairobi, in Kisumu, and there are more to come. I am waiting to see if they'll give the notifications. But what they are calling urban planning is gentrification, if you ask me. Because it's forcefully evicting people and displacing them. Was it this year? Kenya was named one of the hungriest country in the world. After so many years of saying agriculture is our backbone, in fact, agriculture is part of our Big Four agenda. We look at police killings, the enforced disappearances. I am not sure if we have housing in this country. Very few people have decent housing. The rest of us live in shacks. Now it depends whether it's a tin, like a mabati shack, or a concrete shack.
Concrete shack.
Yeah, because a lot of things.
Or a mud wall shack.
Or a mud world shack, because most of the places we call the estates, honestly, they are concrete shacks with no playgrounds, no parks, no electricity, reliable electricity. Kenya Power does the thing. No sanitation, very bad sewerage systems. Our healthcare system was long dead.
Or non-existent sewage system.
Yeah, non-existent. Yeah, we don't have an existing healthcare system. I mean, even the one that we call private, if you're not who and who, it's a very bad experience. I have had to take care of people through both public and the private ones, and it was not a very good experience. So decades.
So we are not yet liberated.
No.
Not yet Uhuru.
Not yet Uhuru.
It's interesting because the liberation that is spoken of by some of the gentlemen you mentioned who've written, and unfortunately some of these gems are hidden in what they've written, and they remain in those books until today. What they prescribed was a leadership, or rather, yes, a leadership then that was going to carry out this liberation in the future. Call him whatever you want, but gentlemen like, a man like Muammar Gaddafi, what he envisioned for the OAU, what Nkrumah prescribed for AU began at the doorstep of individual leaders for states. It was not, let us come together and then chart the way. It was individual leaders. This is what you must do with the demarcation that you have been given as a leader, president, whomever. But unfortunately, I see now that we are now giving this liberation to the puppetry that is the AU, which unfortunately is not doing what it was originally envisioned to do.
Yeah.
So when we say that, let us come together, Muhammad, and say, let us, the different things that Nkrumah said we should do, would only be possible if we have leadership at the demarcated zones. And I'm talking about states here. At the demarcated zones, if you have that proper leadership and governance, if you have some of these things that you're talking about playing out simultaneously, this unity that we talk about as the African continent is something that is it will just happen
Yes.
Yep.
because of the fact that everybody individually has their ducks in a row.
Yeah.
Do you think that the AU is capable of putting together this unified front whereby the building blocks for the front are not even together?
Thank you. This is interesting. I will say the AU in its current state and current formation will not deliver us the unified Africa that we anticipate or desire to see. The facts are clear. The AU is a toothless, a body, I would say, in a sense that the commission in itself is put together and the powers actually are with the head of states. And the head of states are the club. It's like hiring, staff for your company. And if they don't do right, they don't do what you ask them to do, you fire them. I engaged the AU staff several times, and I told them, activists have been arrested, activists have been tortured. What mechanism do we have in place for these activists who are fighting for the true liberation of Africa, who are fighting against corruption, who are talking about, the need for all the services that Irene have been talking about, the basic services. They'll tell me, what, our hands are tied. We have bosses that we have to serve. When we complain too much, sometimes even us at the staff level, they are kind of at risk in terms of job security. So at the end of the day, many of the people at the AU level look at how do I secure my job. So at the ECOWAS level, you come down to ECOWAS level, at the block level, or the EAC level, or all the other ranks, you find that people are trying to, survival. So kind of taking the job for survival. So there must be a serious transformation. I was on Al Jazeera day before yesterday, talking about the need for complete transformation of the AU if we are serious to deliver dignity for all Africans through the AU. So the Secretariat must be given the powers to be able to hold countries accountable when they come in conflict of, lack of implementation of policies, or lack of or countries leadership perpetuating injustice against their citizens. So, but if that is not in place, we have a secretariat that is being answerable to leaders who are in a club. Then we have nowhere to go.
But let me ask you this question: do you actually think that the leadership in Africa is willing to cede power to the AU?
No, I will say no, because it's completely against their interests. Yeah.
Is there any such club where the heads of state, the summit, actually cedes power to the Secretariat?
Always.
It wouldn't make sense, in my opinion, for you to have the representatives of the countries, this is the heads of state, actually being powerless to a technocratic organization such as a commission. How would such an organization be?
Yeah, actually, for me, the Secretariat need the transformation in itself need to be done in a more democratic way. That the Secretariat now will not be answerable to the presidents, but will be answerable to an elected African representatives who put the interests of Africa. They don't put the interests of any leader, but they see Africa. So they go through a whole process. So that's why I'm saying they need a whole transformational process of transforming the AU to give power to the unifying force that will lead the agenda for African unification.
When we talk about African unification, we talk about it as though it's a novel concept, but it isn't. Look at what is the EU. Look at what is NATO. Look at what is groups also formed in the Middle East. This is something that they all do. We're looking at single currency operation in the EU. We are looking at travel, immigration, opening up. It's the same thing that we're talking. We're not talking about something different.
Definitely.
But for some reason, we don't seem to be able to get it. And I'm still on that point, that it's because the individual blocks have flaws that unless they're dealt with, you cannot come together if you don't have unity of purpose.
No.
If you have some people, if you have some blocks that are lagging behind, if you have some who maybe in their purpose are going in one direction and others in a totally different direction, the question then, are you looking for unification or are you looking for internal alignment first? Many countries still maybe young in independence are looking for internal alignment.
Yeah, I'll give an example. You talk about this whole different processes that need to happen that have been happening, or processes that have started at the next level. There's a big challenge at all these different Rex level or the AU level, which is actually hindering the whole process, because they believe in consensus in the decision-making process. I'll give examples of West Africa. The ECOWAS actually at some point have agreed on 2-term limit, except for 2 countries. That's my country, Gambia, and Togo. So because of that, those 2 countries saying that we cannot do this now, it froze. That could not happen.
Because there's no consensus.
Yeah, there was no consensus. Recently, again, they were about to agree on ECO. One single currency for the whole West Africa region.
It's been 25 years, man.
Just one country or 2 countries pull out, they convince the rest of the region to pull out. So at the end of the day, we are in this, back and forth, starting processes that are going to hopefully liberate us. Then we back to the point. But if Europe can have Euro, what should stop Africa to have an Afro? And that's the question. So it's about leadership.
It's very simple, really. I'm going to simplify a complicated situation, a complex one. But let me try anyway. You see, do our African leaders actually favor even the very concept of accountability? Because the thing you're suggesting is you're going to have a continental body that can hold individual leaders accountable.
Perfect.
Okay?
Yes.
And say, this is what we agreed on, this is what we're going to do.
Yes.
Now, the only time we seem to come together is when one of our leaders is supposed to go to The Hague or something.
Yes.
Yes, there's a unity of purpose. Then we are very active and we seem to agree. Now, my concern is not with those who are in leadership right now. That book has been written, it's been published, we are reading it, we know. It's the book that you people are writing. That's what concerns me.
Yes.
And how do you ensure that you do not follow in these footsteps? Because if you follow those footsteps, this discussion is going to be a discussion when you people are around the age that I am at. There'll be younger people saying, these are the guys here. It'll be a cyclical thing that it'll be we the continent that is always talking about change but never quite achieving it.
But that's a win. That's a win of change blowing in Africa, in the younger generation. Technology have given us to connect together and talk about issues. As we speak, young people are talking about reality. So what the emphasis needs to be on is building a leadership of integrity within the young people to really believe that, yes, in our lifetime, we have to deliver
can get somewhere.
Muhammed, in the 1960s, that wind blew.
There was a wind.
It blew so strong that we actually got independence right across.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
We have that independence.
Yes.
Now, we're not talking of independence, we're talking of liberation.
Yes.
Paper flag.
Paper independence.
Yes. Yeah. But that's numerous efforts that have been happening in terms of building the consciousness of young people to understand that nobody will come from anywhere. And we should not fool ourselves that we will be liberated by outside forces, or we will be supported, these small forces supported that are coming to Africa will help us to grow. So we have to really unify ourselves.
We have to
and then it have to.
But there's something that Ndu has raised, and it's got me thinking. Talking about the individual blocks.
Yes.
I think we need to, as we're talking about unification of the continent, integration in various ways, we also need to look inwardly for each country or each region and see how to strengthen democratic processes. Because this whole conversation about integration has been there for a while. The EAC is actually built on integration on various things which are halting and stalling somewhere. The political integration, the economic integration, those are things that are there on paper for the countries of the East African community. We shall have a shilling, we shall have free movement of people and goods, we shall have non-tariff barriers, which now shall lead us into political integration. And then you say, political integration means we all have the same political system. No, let's stall that. If we don't think of how we can support each of these countries to get to a certain level of internal freedom politically, that you have proper democracy in these countries, that you have openness and conversations. Yes, Kenya sounds like, it's one of those we still haven't gotten there, but I think we've gotten there in very many ways in terms of our own openness, our own freedom to speak, to raise the issues, to push. That's what got us into the second liberation, for example. Now we are talking at the verge of a third liberation where we are saying, okay, we're going to have an economic liberation. I think we're getting there. But how can we get the other countries around us? How can we get Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Uganda, and South Sudan to have the same conversation as us? If you go to the ECOWAS, the same. If we don't have that, we can't. We can have the Africa continental free trade area, which will never, ever take off. It'll always be on paper.
Muhammad, remember, in East Africa, we actually did have a community which worked.
Yeah.
Yes.
East African Harbours Corporation and Railways or something of that sort. The Postal Service was East African. The Airways was East African. The university was East African.
African.
We've had it.
Yes.
And the shilling was, it didn't matter whether it was a Kenyan shilling, Uganda shilling or Tanzanian shilling. It was exchangeable. This so-called freedom of movement. People moved across these borders in the freest way possible. It's something we have seen, so that we haven't.
Yes.
The thing that Ndu talked about, which in my mind is something that perhaps we should give consideration, there has to be leadership somewhere. Now, in this region, fortunately, because of the freedom that this country enjoys in terms of the power of the media, okay, we are able, the very thing you're saying, we're able to voice things.
Yes.
And that ability brings about a certain leadership that we can offer our neighbors. But this is the sort of freedom and leadership that is resisted.
Yeah. They've been fought for.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because of our history again. Because who messed up that integration?
Us.
Exactly. So, and even if you look at actually movement for other East African countries are a lot easier in my experience than for Kenyans. I have had a very rough time, especially going into Tanzania. They just see Kenya on your ID, and it's just, they actually told us they don't believe our COVID certificates are real. Okay.
Wow.
They were like, yeah, we get it, it's from Cambridge, but your systems
so
are
what?
flawed. And so that's why I'm saying it's true that we need to work on this internal flows. We are not demystifying that fact. What we are saying is, as we work on these internal flows, it would be foolhardy to say, okay, now we have Kenya, now we have EAC, ECOWAS, they have done their thing, but SADC has not done it. It won't make any sense. Sankara managed to do whatever they did in Burkina Faso, did a very good transformation. Then someone sneaked in from the neighboring country and messed up the whole thing. So there's no other way about it. We have to work on our internal flows, but it has to be concurrent. That solidarity has to be there, so that what the so-called liberated zones have already done is guarded. It's not outdone.
It has got to be, so it's got to be Pan-African. If we just look at how we got our independence, so countries were also fighting for the independence of their neighbors. There was a whole conversation and movement. We are free, yes, but we are Tanzania, but also Kenyans should also get their independence. All of us then started saying Zimbabwe should get its independence. That is the conversation. So the same thing that you are saying, Muhammad, that because of technology, now you see all these civil society organizations, all these justice movements, all having some connectivity in conversation.
Yes.
I think it's the same. But also just starting from the point of, so what's happening in Gambia?
Great.
So that the Kenyans can say, this is what's happening in Gambia. Can we? What support do you need from us? What can we do to push your conversation? And also, you Gambians, this is what the kind of support that we need with our conversation back here in Kenya. Because there are different conversations, we are at different levels, but we all need to be coming in to push for your conversation in your way, our conversation in our way, then all of us will now have the same conversation.
Yeah, that's what we are talking about, the re-energizing and reinforcing the spirit of Ubuntu. That's what I said, the new air. It has been born in the young people's minds. I was in the front line of the fight against dictatorship in the struggle in Gambia. And then we have a whole, solidarity support across the continent. Supporting us, encouraging us that you can do this. Even there was a mission that was sent to Gambia to be in solidarity with us. For the first time in our history, when Gambians are in crisis, about 45,000 Gambians were running for their lives when we were fighting against the dictator Jammeh. A delegation came, risked their lives to support us in that struggle. And the ideas that we came out of it in those discussions really helped us to move faster and push our people. And as we speak now, because I work at continental level across countries, about all these 55 countries, when I talk to young people, what we are saying to ourselves, in our time, when the time comes for us to do it together, we should not fail. We should be able to hold each other accountable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The advantage you have is that we're in the communication age.
Yes.
And it makes it much, much easier to be able to do things that people would need to physically travel in order to do.
Yeah.
Now, whether you are able to take advantage of these advantages that you already have, this one, as we said, time will tell, won't it?
Yeah, we're getting there. And then, the Western world will not also slip to allow us to quickly liberate.
This is it.
But we must also stay awake because we know what they're going to do, and we must prepare because we know they've done it before. They keep doing it. Yeah. It's something we know.
Thank you.
Actually, that's what just failed the echo in West Africa. France came in and then manipulated Ivory Coast, and then they pull out. The whole thing collapsed.
And that's why we must support West African countries that are kicking France out right now.
Definitely. Mali and others.
Now you have said it. There's a question that has been asked of you. Just scroll down on Twitter. There's somebody who's asking, so yes, you're talking about what your library does, the Composite library. Are there books about... slightly up. You're down 2 hours. There.
Voila.
There it is. Ask the lady whether they have books documenting the true history of Africa before colonization. Deep cultured books or even religious books on African traditional religion and, of course, arts.
Yes, we do. Of course, the history of Africa has evolved.
So the simple answer, because you're running out of time, is yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Irene Asuwa from Ukombozi Library and Muhammed Lamin Saidi Khan from Africans Rising. Thank you and have a happy African Liberation Day throughout your activities today.
Thank you. African for Africans.
Africa for Africans.